On the morning of August 9th, 1969, Winifred Chapman would discover a shocking crime scene. The details of the case would become one of the most infamous stories of murder in the annals of American crime. In the Los Angeles home of actress Sharon Tate and film director Roman Polanski, 5 people had been murdered. The murders were said to have been carried out by followers of Charles Manson and on his orders. Prosecutors say Manson, an ex-convict who'd spent the majority of his life in various institutions and correctional facilities, planned and directed these crimes in an attempt to start helter-skelter, an apocalyptic race war that Manson believed was described in the Book of Revelation and preached by the Beatles in their music. It's claimed that the Polanski house was chosen as retribution, at least in part, due to Manson's rejection as an artist by the West Coast music industry. Lead prosecutor Vincent Boyosi described Manson as a would-be pop singer of small talent living in the desert. Much has been written about the Manson murders. There are countless books, documentaries, and articles that present the details of these crimes, examine the veracity of the given motive, proffer alternative motives, and evaluate the subsequent prosecution in much detail. Tonight we'll take a look at the music industry aspect of the Manson family milieu. So join me as we talk Beach Boys, record deals, music moguls, and murder on this episode of The Summer of Sam. Our story begins in the federal prison system. In August of 1936, Alvin Karpis, the Depression-era gangster called the brains of the mob Barker Gang, began serving a lifetime federal prison sentence at Alcatraz for kidnapping and murder. In April of 1962, with Alcatraz being closed, Karpis is transferred to McNeil Island Penitentiary in Washington State. Here, Karpis would meet a young inmate named Charles Manson. It's from Alvin Karpis that Manson learns to play guitar. In his autobiography, Karpis writes this of Charles Manson: "The kid approaches me to request music lessons. He wants to learn guitar and become a music star. Little Charlie is so lazy and shiftless, I doubt he'll put in the time required to learn. The youngster's been in institutions all his life. First orphanages, then reformatories, and finally federal prison. His mother, a prostitute, was never around to look after him. I decide it's time someone did something for him, and to my surprise, he learns quickly. He has a pleasant voice and a pleasing personality, although he's unusually meek and mild for a convict. He never has a harsh word to say, and is never involved in even an argument." Charlie would make another acquaintance in McNeil Island that would offer to help him pursue his musical ambitions. Phil Kaufman was serving time for marijuana smuggling. Kaufman would go on to become a major record producer, working with the likes of the Rolling Stones, Graham Parsons, Frank Zappa, Etta James, Joe Cocker, and more. Kaufman thought Charlie had enough talent to get a recording contract. At Manson's release from prison, Kaufman gave him the name of a friend in the film industry, Gary Stromberg of Universal Studios. He advised Manson to take a little time to get acclimated to the outside world and contact Stromberg when he was ready to pursue music. Stromberg was impressed enough with Charlie that he arranged a 3-hour studio session at UNI for him. He also used Manson as a consultant on a potential film project. The film would depict the return of Jesus as a black man in the South. The movie was never made. Stromberg said Universal hated it. In the short time Manson was out of prison, he made several contacts within the music industry. Chief among these was drummer Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Soon after meeting Dennis, Charlie and several of the girls lived with Dennis in his Pacific Palisades house for several months. Their endless summer began like this. In 1968, Dennis Wilson picked up 2 hitchhikers on the Pacific Coast Highway in California and gave them a ride home. A couple weeks later, he again picked up these same 2 hitchhikers and brought them to his house. The hitchhikers were 2 young women, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. Not long after this, many of the family members moved into the Wilson house. Dennis and Charlie seem to have developed a pretty close relationship. And you can see this in some interviews that Dennis Wilson had done in 68 and 69. And the first one that I want to talk about is with the Record Mirror for the week ending December 21st, 1968. That's when the tabloid was released. But the interviewer is talking to him about music, their new albums, kind of where he's at. The Beach Boys had, like, other bands at the time, had been looking for gurus and these sort of things. But Dennis tells the interviewer that he lives with 17 girls. So I just want to focus in on the part of the article where he talks about that. And so Dennis says, I still believe in meditation, and I'm not experimenting with tribal living. I live in the woods in California near Death Valley with 17 girls. They're space ladies, and they'd make a great group. I'm thinking of launching them as the family gyms. So, living in the woods in California near Death Valley sounds an awful lot like Spawn's movie ranch, and that'll come up in the next interview that we talk about. But back to the interview. The interviewer asked Dennis, how did you come to meet up with no less than 17 girls? Dennis replies, it happened strangely. I went up into the mountains with my houseboy to take an LSD trip. We met 2 girls hitchhiking. One of them was pregnant. We gave them a lift, and a purse was left in the car. About a month later near Malibu, I saw the pregnant girl again. Only this time she'd had her baby. I was overjoyed for her, and it was through her that I met the other girls. I told them about our involvement with the Maharishi, and they told me they too had a guru, a guy named Charlie who'd recently come out of jail after 12 years. Dennis goes on to describe Charlie this way. He says his mother, Charlie's mother, was a hooker. His father was a gangster. He'd drifted into crime, but when I met him, I found he had great musical ideas. We're writing together now. He's dumb in some ways, but I accept his approach and have learnt from him. He taught me a dance, and he goes on to describe the dance. The reporter asks, are you supporting all these people? Dennis replies, no. If anything, they're supporting me. I had all the rich status symbols, Rolls-Royce, Ferrari, home after home. Then I woke up, gave away 50% to 60% of my money. Now I live in one small room with one candle, and I'm happy finding myself. So the next couple of quotes come from an article in Rave magazine from May of 1969. So now we're only a couple of months ahead of the murders. But the interviewer asked him this question. He says, you live your life in an apparently fearless manner, but is there anything that frightens you? Fear is nothing but awareness. I was only frightened as a child because I did not understand fear. The dark, being lost, what was under the bed. It came from within. Sometimes the wizard frightens me. Charles Manson, who is another friend of mine, who says he is God and the devil. He sings, plays, and writes poetry, and may be another artist for Brother Records. Lastly, let's look at a couple excerpts from a Lon Goddard article in the Record Mirror on the 5th of July of 1969. And I'll go ahead and read just a couple of paragraphs of this to you. The second paragraph of the article begins, it was reported in Rave magazine that Dennis lived in a house with 17 women somewhere in Los Angeles. What was the basis of this commune and what exactly happened in it? Dennis and I adjourned for a chat in the bathroom. Dennis says, the house was in Pacific Palisades, but there were hordes of people with binoculars, and the police got the idea that it was an orgy and drug scene. We were on to that to start with, but we soon got wise. Too many people, mostly girls, got onto it, and we had to move. Now we have an old movie lot owned by a blind man who lets us run the place. We try to make it productive by helping anyone we can who looks like they need it. In the beginning, there were just a few girls living there besides myself and the other guys. We'd make love and discuss things while contributing to one purpose, to help others. The girls would go out on the streets and beg money from those who looked like they could afford it, then bring it home. I'd say, go out and don't come back until you have $5. So clearly in that excerpt, Dennis is describing Spawn Ranch and George Spahn, the blind man that ran it. So, and that was May of 1969 that came out. So Clearly there's a very close relationship with Dennis and Charlie and the girls, and Dennis describing them as a band that they want to sign with Brother Records. In just a minute, we'll look at a clip where Paul Watkins, a member of the Manson family, describes the musicians in the family going into, as he puts it, some of the finest studios in Los Angeles. Studios, he says, that musicians would give their left arm to record in.
And Charlie seemed quite magical. Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, for example, became charmed by Charlie and gave him money. There were ladies in Malibu gave him money. Money just came. We'd walk around with several $1,000s in our pockets at any given time. It was hard to tell that we were doing something wrong. We certainly weren't living in poverty and walking around, sleeping in gutters and walking around with rags hanging off of us. We were in and out of the best music studios, regardless of if the producers and people would like to cop to it now. We were in some of the studios that musicians would give their left arm to be in. And Manson was perceived to be, and the group was perceived to be quite talented by a number of industry people here in Los Angeles. There was nothing to indicate that things were really seriously deteriorating right up until the murders happened.
Doing some research on the internet, I found this list of studios with some approximate times that Manson may have recorded. In 1967, he recorded at UNI Records. I believe that was set up by Stromberg. 1968, it recorded at Gold Star Studios. 1969, they did some recording at Sound City Studios. They also recorded at Wilder Brothers Studio. Of course, they recorded in Brian Wilson's home studio. It appears there was also some recordings of them done by Steve Desper out at the ranch. Guitarist Jerry Cole of the Wrecking Crew describes doing session work at the behest of Terry Melcher to chart up 4 Manson songs.
I think one of the most interesting points of time was when we recorded Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson was, at best, very interesting. Terry called me and said, I want you to do I'm going to send you this tape. I want you to chart it up. Give me an introduction, give me an ending on 4 songs. I said, okay, who is it? He said, I don't know. So Charlie Manson had apparently schemed and drugged and whatever he had done to get enough money to cut this session at RCA. I believe Larry Nectar was on it, Hal. I don't know who played piano. Mike Dacey played guitar, and me. So I put the session together, and we went in, and we did slave tape. Now, the deal was that if the arrangements were fine, the music was great, if the vocals were up to the level of the playing, they might have a chance for a record deal. So Manson, he'd look holes through you, man. How's this sound? How's this? That? Everything was cool. He was just spooky. He was really just spooky. Not sneaky, but spooky. So we finished our stuff. I said, what, anything? I want to overdub here. So I did all the overdubs, got it done. So it was done. Terry finished the vocals as the lyrics were out there. The vocals were under there. He got it done, and Terry said he took it back, and Terry told him, he said, I can't get a deal on this record. Nobody thinks the vocals, the lyrics, nothing is a hit. Well, you told me. He said, no, I told you. You're going to put up the money for the record, and that's the way it was going to be. That was not acceptable to Charlie Manson. Now, which a lot of people do not know, because I got paid union scale to go up and teach Paul Revere and the Raiders all the notes that I played on the records. The Sharon Tate House used to belong to Terry Melcher and Mark Lindsay. And it was a rental home. They had 2 ocelots. Both Terry and Mark had a ocelot. And one of them was up in a lemon tree and fell down because they were declawed. They said, we got to move out of here, someplace else. So they had moved out of there. But I had gone up to that home and taught the Raiders how to play to go out on the road to play. And that hit at Sharon Tate was not for Sharon Tate. That was for Mark Lindsay and Terry Melcher. Immediately after it happened, they got on a private jet and flew to the middle of England. And I got maybe 5, 6 phone calls from Terry Melcher saying, what's going on in town, man? What's going on in town?
So it seems many industry insiders had an appreciation of Manson and his talent for music. And here we can listen to Neil Young describe Charlie and the way that Neil perceived him and his talent.
I knew Charlie Manson, so it spooked the hell out of me. He wasn't what you'd call a songwriter. He was like a song spewer. But he got turned down. He got turned down by record companies. He got turned down by Reprise. And I remember I told Mo Austin, I said, this guy, he's good. It's just a little out of control.
Charlie was much more involved with the Los Angeles music scene and some big names in the music industry, far more than what is presented to us in the official narrative. The last point that I'd like to discuss is the Beach Boys song Never Learn Not to Love, which appeared on their 2020 album and is credited to Dennis Wilson as the writer of the song. This song started out as a Charles Manson composition called Cease to Exist. And so the Beach Boys took it and gave it an arrangement, changed some of the lyrics, and titled the song Never Learn Not to Love You. And here we can see Brian Wilson describing that song and crediting it to his brother Dennis in this clip.
Because 2020 was interesting at the time too. It seemed to go on again, didn't it, from that point? I was thinking particularly of Never Learn Not to Love. And
I love that song. My brother Dennis did that, yeah.
Yes, I love that song.
So I've always thought that the music industry connections played a bigger part in these murders than we've been previously told. I think in part Manson may have felt that the song Cease to Exist was stolen from him, and in interviews although he doesn't name any songs, he seems to indicate that other music was stolen from him. So I think he may have felt that he had something owed to him. I'm sure the Beach Boys and Dennis Wilson felt that with all the money and property they'd given Charlie and the members of the family, that they'd been more than duly compensated. But it's always seemed to me that the music industry connections and the things that happened with the recording, the lack of follow-up, in getting Charlie a contract that he might have thought he had earned or deserved, I think these things played a fairly significant part in the murders. Although over 50 years on, and lots of controversy and lots of questions about why indeed these murders actually happened. But if you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. There'll be more content to come. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you'll come back for the next episode of The Summer of Sam.